In this video, I'm going to take you through the gear and the step-by-step process that I use to take outdoor one light portraits like these. So let's get into these portraits. I'm going to gloss over camera gear. I shoot on the Sony a7 IV and my main lens is the Sony 50 f1.2. I also shoot sometimes on the 85mm or on the 70-200. But really whatever camera system you're using is fine. We're going to talk more about lighting gear today. So my main workhorse light is this Profoto B10 Plus. And then because we're using these lights off camera, not on the hot shoe, you need a radio trigger to set off your light. This is the Profoto trigger for Sony cameras. And I can control my lights from here, which is really nice. And every time I take a photo, this will set off my flash. I bought into the Profoto system with some used gear way back in the day. And as I built up more and more Profoto modifiers, it just got harder to switch systems. And so I've just stuck with them for 15 years and I've never been disappointed. But Profoto isn't the only brand out there making flashes. I hear Godox has some pretty good affordable flashes. So those might be good to check out if you're just getting started with this type of shooting. So one thing to pay attention to when you're researching flash options is the max power output. And that's typically measured in watt seconds. The B10 Plus puts out 500 watt seconds at full power, and that's pretty good for everything I need. That gives me enough light to fill out a big umbrella or softbox and balance it well with my natural light, even if I'm working in full sun. So around 500 watt seconds is a good one to look for. Sometimes you can get away with a little less if you don't plan on using some of those really big modifiers. For your flash, you're probably going to want some modifiers to shape and change your light. I think modifiers kind of fall into four main buckets. First one is hard reflectors. And that's something like this. This is the Profoto Magnum, but there are other reflectors for different brands. And it's just a big bowl of silver, basically. And your flash kind of comes out right here in the middle. And this gives you like a very harsh, directed, powerful light, pretty similar to sunlight. I use hard reflectors once in a while. Sometimes I'll put the Magnum on my light with an orange CTO gel if I want to mimic sunset light. But that's probably my least used modifier. Next up, we have indirect modifiers. This is a beauty dish from Profoto, and it's a similar concept. Your light is reflected around this bowl, but it has this plate that blocks direct flash from hitting your subject. So all the light you're getting is bounced from this bowl. The indirect reflectors are one of my favorites. They soften the light a little bit, but they still put out a good amount of power, so you can really battle the sun or battle the natural light outdoors. And then the next two types of light sources are umbrellas and softboxes. And these are big modifiers that really soften your light, give you nice soft shadows and a good wrap around your subject's face. But they can be tough to use outdoors, especially if you're in wind. It's basically a big sail that's gonna knock over your light stand and your flash and might break stuff. So I typically only use these if I know there's no wind or if I have some help with me to hold the stand in place. I actually did a shoot a couple years ago at an Air Force base shooting some portraits for a magazine, and I brought a 7-foot Octabox with me because I know I wanted to shoot kind of wider portraits, waist up or even full body. So that light would have to be further away, but I still wanted a nice soft light, so I needed a big light source. And on that day, we showed up to the job and there were like 30-35 mile an hour winds, and we were out on the tarmac with a bunch of planes. And so it was just a rough shoot. We had 3 Air Force guys holding the stands and holding various parts of the Octabox to try and keep it in place while I was shooting. And had a lot of fun, got some cool images, but yeah, that was a tough, sort of stressful shoot. And then the last piece of gear that I think is important for this style of portrait is a good set of ND filters or a variable ND. You just want some sort of filter that will darken your image. And this is important because typically your camera has a max sync speed. Normally that's around 1/200th of a second. And as you start to go above that, you'll start to get banding in your images because your shutter speed is faster than your flash. Nowadays, a lot of modern flashes and triggers have something called high-speed sync, where as you go above your max shutter speed, the flash will start to pulse instead of one powerful blast. And that kind of gets rid of that banding issue, but you lose a ton of power with your flash. So if you're using it towards the upper end of its limit, you're not gonna get enough power out of high-speed sync. And I find that you get more power if you just keep it below your sync speed, put an ND filter on your lens, and then you can still open up your aperture nice and wide and get that look, the nice blurry background that you want for a portrait. So that about covers it for the gear. Let's get into the process. So to shoot these style of portraits, I typically start out by looking at my ambient light. Look at my location, my background, where do I want my subject, everything that goes into a normal photo, and I don't even think about the flash yet. But I want to start with a decent image. I don't want to use the flash to try and turn a crappy image into something. So I'm typically positioning my subject in a way where the natural light already looks pretty good, and then I bring in my flash to kind of augment that. So I'm paying attention to where the natural light is. If it's cloudy, that's great. You get nice, even light everywhere. If you have full sun, maybe you have to work in the shade or position the sun behind your subject just so they don't have harsh shadows on their face. So all that stuff kind of goes into my thought process. So once I figure out what I want my image to look like, I'll get my subject positioned and I'll do a few baseline, just ambient exposures. And I'll typically underexpose my ambient light by anywhere from 1/3 of a stop down to almost 2 stops, depending on how dramatic I want this image to look. And then once I have that ambient light where I want it, I'll bring in my flash and I'll do some more photos to get my exposure dialed in. Now in terms of light positioning, it's pretty similar to studio work. What looks good in a studio is probably going to look good outdoors. So a lot of times I'm shooting Rembrandt style lighting, which is just about 45 degrees to the side and 45 degrees up. So the light's kind of coming in like this and leaves a little shadow on this side of the subject's face. Sometimes I'll do more side lighting. Sometimes with the soft light reflector, the beauty dish, I'll do butterfly lighting where the light is almost right here and you just get a little shadow under the nose. But any of those basic lighting setups typically look good outdoors. You just have to pay attention to the ambient and your main light and basically treat it as a 2-light setup. So one thing to remember as you're working out the balance between your natural light and your flash is that your flash isn't affected by your shutter speed until you get into those high-speed sync stuff. But if you stay below your sync speed, shutter speed only affects your ambient light. And then your neutral density filter, your ISO, and your aperture affect both the flash and the ambient light. So until you get the hang of that, it can be tough trying to dial in your flash and your ambient. But you can use those to kind of change the ratio of ambient light to flash light to get the style and the look that you want. So that's about it. It's not a complicated process, but it is nuanced and it takes some experience to get that balance looking natural. I never really want someone to be distracted by the light in my photo. I hope they look at the image and they just think of it as a good image, and then maybe if they start to break it down, they notice, oh, there's some artificial light here. So that's kind of what I'm shooting for when I'm balancing my natural and my flash light. A few more tips before I end this video. So some people use light meters and they measure the ratios between different lighting sources. You can do that. I always felt that that was just a little too technical and I ended up just winging it on a shoot anyways. And then over time, I just kind of developed, I don't know, an eye or a sense of that balance between flash and natural light. So on every shoot, I'm really just eyeballing it. Another thing to keep in mind, as you're setting up your flash and you're changing all your settings, your subject is just kind of sitting there waiting. So don't forget to tell them, hey, these are all tests, I have to change my camera settings, and just get them a little comfortable on camera. I normally tell them at the beginning of the shoot that things are already kind of awkward and I have a lot of changes to make to my settings, and so we can just chat and don't worry about these photos, these are going to be deleted. And it kind of helps them relax a little bit, helps me relax a little, and I can focus on my camera settings without feeling like I'm leaving them behind, and we just chat about life stuff. And then once I have my light where I want it, then I'll kind of start giving them a little direction, and we just sort of ease into shooting very smoothly. And they don't feel like now they need to pose or they start to look stiff. You just kind of ease into it and then you're shooting and you're getting good photos. So that's about it for my process. It's not super complicated, but it does take some practice and experience to just make things look natural. Hopefully I covered everything. If I missed something or you have any questions, please reach out in the comments below and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.